Difficulty is, no pun intended, a difficult component of creating a video game. But even with that challenge, there are creative ways to circumvent that difficult hurdle to include difficulty in your video games without frustrating the player. But unfortunately, the absolute worst way of including difficulty in your video game is by creating enemies who just won't die. Now, I'm not talking about enemies that you have to lose to progress the story. Those are scripted losses. And I'm not talking about enemies that just seem invincible, like Baldur in God of War. I'm talking about enemies that you can throw everything at, and it feels like you're doing nothing. What I'm talking about is the bullet sponge. A bullet sponge, for the uninitiated, is an enemy in a video game, typically a first-person shooter or a looter shooter, that simply just absorbs a ridiculous amount of damage with no other interesting gameplay implications about the fight. Essentially, if you find yourself just holding down right trigger or right click facing an enemy, just waiting for their health bar to go down without you having to do anything else, you are up against a bullet sponge. Now, the question that arises in everyone's mind is the bullet sponge always a terrible enemy archetype to have in video games? And quite honestly, the answer is no. A game series that's done the bullet sponge enemy incredibly well is the Gears of War series. I'm going to show you two enemies in the Gears of War series who fall into the bullet sponge category, and then explain to you exactly why they aren't an issue. The first enemy is a Reaver. Essentially what a Reaver is a flying squid-like creature that takes a lot of damage to go down. The way Gears of War makes this work is 1. The graphical fidelity. Every time you shoot an enemy, you get the haptic feedback of that enemy getting torn to shreds by your bullets. There's a lot of blood, there's a lot of gore, there's a lot of particle effects, so it never really feels like you're just putting bullets down range and nothing's happening. 2. Over time, you will see the enemy begin to degrade as you shoot multiple target points to weaken the enemy to eventually take them down. This is better encapsulated in the second enemy type in Gears of War, the Brumak. The Brumak has multiple turrets and rockets on its body that you can shoot to do damage to the Brumak's actual flesh. This provides you targets so that you're not constantly just pumping lead into the Brumak's body. You can just shoot the Brumak's body directly and it will eventually go down, but at least there's that alternate option of those weak points to go after. Lots of games have this type of enemy, the enemy which you have to hit at specific points to take them down. They typically are the tankier enemies that fit into the bullet sponge archetype, but they provide you that option of going after those weaker zones so you're not wasting your time and not having any fun. Best way to create an enemy like this is quite simply to not have them be humanoid. Creating an enemy that is an alien or a monster or a demon or an orc or a troll or something else that is fantastical, that once you have that creature or enemy type in your game, it is easier to suspend your disbelief when you're dealing with the fact that they are absorbing a ridiculous amount of damage. But then on the other hand, you have the worst type of bullet sponge enemies, the humans. I'm going to play for you a 30-second clip from the game The Division where we are facing off against a human opponent, and I want you to just take a look at the ungodly amount of damage that this human being is able to endure. That right there was terrible game design. At no point should your player be sitting there holding down right click or holding down the right trigger or whatever control scheme they're using and just watching a human being walk towards them completely undisturbed by the amount of damage that they're putting into them. This kind of gameplay convention completely takes you out of the game. There is only so much suspension of disbelief we can have when it comes to these sorts of things. We can understand that it's not practical for someone to be shot in Call of Duty and all they have to do is duck behind the corner for a little bit and then they'll recover and be fully raring to go back into a fight. That is something that we are willing to believe, but something like this makes you want to do nothing more than break your gaming system and return the product. So what's the solution for something like this? How do you fix this issue? Well, it's quite simple. There are multiple ways that this sort of issue can be rectified. Difficulty does not directly equate to frustration. Mild frustration is okay, but something like you just saw would make someone furious. The first solution is the glass cannon. Essentially what the glass cannon is someone that can put out an extreme amount of damage but can't take any. So that solution goes this way. The Hitman games are great at this. Your character, Agent 47 in the Hitman games, can take out most enemy types in 1 to 2 hits, but he is not great in combat situations that are just open with a bunch of people shooting at him at the same time. He can't take that many shots and he goes down relatively easily. It's the same kind of concept in the Dark Souls games. The enemies and the bosses you face in those games put out a ridiculous amount of damage and take you down relatively easily, but they themselves are also able to be taken down with a certain amount of skill and finesse. The second archetype is the overwhelming force archetype. You'll see something like this in a game like Days Gone or Dynasty Warriors. This archetype is just putting you against a lot more enemies. You yourself are incredibly powerful, you have the ability to take down enemies relatively easily, but there are just a lot of them, so you're constantly being swarmed. They're coming at you from multiple directions, and well, you can take 5 to 10 down relatively easily, but there are 20 or 30 or 50 of them all around you trying to take you down.
Come on! Come on!
The third and final archetype for this video discussion is the weak point archetype. Like we discussed earlier, give your enemies weak points for people to target to make it easier to take them down and to make the battle less frustrating. It's okay to have the rest of the body be quote unquote bullet spongy, but give them something to go after, like an eye or an arm or a different part of a body. A game that does this well is The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Link goes against Hinoxes or Lionels or Stone Taluses, but these creatures all have definitive weak points that are things that you want to go after to make the battle easier for you. There are a lot of other gameplay possibilities to add into a game to make bullet sponge-esque enemies not so frustrating to face. You add evade mechanics, alternate abilities that can make you intangible or faster or stronger temporarily. AI controlled allies that can assist with making the battle a little less monotonous. Player controlled allies that you can direct to do certain things that may debuff the enemy or buff you in a certain way to make it so that the battle doesn't drag on as long. All of this to say, we do not need bullet sponge enemies in video games. Moving forward from developers, I never ever want to see this again. Thank you so much for watching and behave yourself.